Okay, let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we're looking at a massive turning point in Southeast Asian history, the 1817 Maluku Rebellion. But we're not just going to talk about the battles. We're going to really dig into the why. What exactly pushes an entire region to its absolute breaking point, to the point where they rise up against one of the most powerful colonial empires of the era? Well, let's find out.
Picture the scene for a second. It's May 15th, 1817. Literally out of nowhere, native forces launch this explosive, highly coordinated surprise assault on Fort Duurstede in Saparua. I mean, it is a total shock to the system. In just a matter of hours, they completely overrun the colonial garrison. They capture the fort, and the Dutch resident, Johannes Rudolf van den Berg, along with his forces, are killed. Actually, only his 5-year-old son survives. It's just a stunning, violent shattering of the colonial order.
But before we get swept up in the tactics and the battles, we have to stop and ask the most absolutely crucial question. Why? Why did the 1817 Maluku Rebellion start in the first place? Rebellions like this, they don't just happen on a random Tuesday, right? They're the result of intense building pressure. So to really get the why, we need to look at the systemic shocks that were just forced onto the local population and, of course, the extraordinary guy who channeled all that outrage.
And that brings us to our first section, a leader forged in war, Thomas Matulessy. To understand the start of this whole thing, you have to understand the man at the center of it.
Okay, look at the sheer contrast here. It's pretty startling. So during British rule from 1810 to 1816, Matulessy, who was born into a family with noble lineage, by the way, gets formal European military training. He joins the British Ambonese Corps, proves he's this incredible, disciplined strategist and a great marksman, and he actually works his way all the way up to the rank of sergeant major. But then the British withdraw, the Dutch return to power in 1816, and what do they do with these highly trained native soldiers? They just fire them. No pensions, no integrating them into the new military structure, nothing. You've got this highly respected military leader who gets his entire livelihood and status stripped away overnight by a changing of the guard. Talk about a profound personal and professional insult, right?
But, one dismissed soldier doesn't start a massive mass uprising all by himself. We've got to look at the real catalyst here, the policies that actually ignited the powder keg. And those catalysts were introduced by the new Dutch resident, Van den Berg. The crucial thing to understand is that these 3 specific policies, which basically boiled down to economic suffocation, financial panic, and straight-up military fear, they created this deeply oppressive environment almost instantly. The Dutch didn't just come back, they came back with a seriously heavy hand. Let's break these down so you can really feel what the average person in Maluku was dealing with back in early 1817.
First up, the return of kerja paksa. Basically, this meant the local population was violently shoved back into a brutal spice monopoly. The Dutch administration demanded forced labor and mandatory crop deliveries. So imagine any tiny bit of economic freedom you might have had just completely vanishing, instantly replaced by a system that demands your grueling labor and literally takes your harvest to enrich a foreign empire. It's devastating.
Second, we hit a sudden, massive currency crisis. The Dutch forced the locals to hand over their hard-earned gold and silver coins and gave them paper money in return. People were terrified. I mean, they honestly thought their entire life savings were being turned into worthless pieces of paper overnight. Plus, Matulessy and his community were Protestant Christians, so there was this very real, deep-seated fear that they wouldn't even be able to pay their vital church dues with this new money. And if that wasn't enough, toss in swirling rumors that native Ambonese soldiers were going to be forcibly conscripted and shipped off to Java to serve the Dutch army. So you have economic ruin, financial panic, and the dread of forced military exile. The powder keg was officially packed.
With those kinds of impossible conditions, a massive response was basically inevitable. Saparua rises, and the Pattimura War begins.
Just look at the timeline here. The speed of this escalation is absolutely staggering. On May 14th, local leaders and elders have this secret council at Mount Sinahiri. They recognize Matulessy's military genius, elect him supreme commander, and give him the traditional title Kapitan Pattimura. Literally the very next day, May 15th, they storm Fort Duurstede. Just 5 days after that, May 20th, they're fighting the Battle of Wiesel Beach, and by May 29th, they're issuing formal political declarations. In just 2 weeks, Pattimura took a secret meeting and escalated it into a full-scale regional war that spread to neighboring islands.
And you can see from the data here, his British military tactics paid off right away. When the Dutch sent a counter-expedition of about 200 troops under Major Beges to take Saparua back, Pattimura's forces didn't just fight them, they ambushed them at Wiesel Beach. They inflicted heavy casualties and killed the major. These weren't just lucky strikes, they were shocking, devastating victories against a professional European military. The native forces were fighting with some serious tactical intelligence.
14. That is the exact number of specific grievances Pattimura and local leaders laid out in the Hariya Proclamation on May 29th. See, they didn't just want to fight, they wanted the whole world to know exactly why they were fighting. This document formally declared their resistance and systematically outlined the colonial tyranny they were suffering under. It was an incredibly brilliant political move to back up their military strikes.
But, as we know, a colonial empire doesn't just roll over and accept defeat. Faced with the spreading insurrection led by highly capable commanders, the empire strikes back.
The Dutch governor-general dispatched massive reinforcements, modern artillery, naval blockades, ruthless scorched earth tactics. They absolutely squeezed the region. But the real tragedy here, Pattimura wasn't actually defeated in open tactical combat. On November 11, 1817, his secret location in a house in Sirisori was betrayed to the Dutch by Patia Kun, the king of Boeo. The rebellion was fractured from the inside out. So he's captured and hauled off in chains to Fort Victoria in Ambon. Now, the Dutch know how much influence he has, right? So they try multiple times to persuade him to sign an official apology and collaborate with them. In exchange, they offer him a pardon. But Pattimura steadfastly refuses all terms. He absolutely refuses to compromise his principles, even at the cost of his own life. Finally, on December 16, 1817, at just 34 years old, he's brought to the gallows and hanged right alongside his key commanders.
But according to local tradition, right before the noose was placed around his neck, he looked out at the crowd and delivered this incredibly chilling prophecy. He said, "Old Pattimuras may fall, but young Pattimuras will rise to continue my struggle." He knew his life was ending, but he was making absolutely sure that the spirit of the rebellion, that flat-out refusal to accept colonial tyranny, would survive his death.
And honestly, survived it did, which brings us to his enduring legacy. From rebel to national hero.
The Dutch might have physically crushed the 1817 rebellion, but Pattimura definitely won the war of historical memory. His sacrifice deeply permeates modern Indonesian culture. On November 6, 1973, he was officially granted the title of National Hero of Indonesia. And it's not just some dusty state honor either. Every single year on May 15th, people in Maluku celebrate Pattimura Day with massive torchlit processions. Plus, the main public university in Ambon and the city's main airport, both proudly bear his name.
He is even commemorated in the pockets of everyday citizens. For years, the 1,000 Indonesian rupiah banknote featured Kapitan Pattimura. And notice how he's depicted. He's holding a traditional Malukan parang salawaku, a sword and shield. He is forever immortalized as a defiant warrior, standing guard over the nation's currency.
So, I'm going to leave you with this provocative thought. How does a seemingly defeated rebellion ultimately achieve immortality? Thomas Matulessy lost his life, and his forces were eventually overwhelmed by sheer imperial firepower. But the why of the rebellion, the rejection of forced labor, the demand for economic dignity, and the refusal to be treated as subjects rather than human beings, those ideas survived. Sometimes the very ideas that spark a rebellion are just powerful enough to outlive the empires that try to suppress them. Thanks for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning the history you think you know, and I'll see you next time.